The crowding out of the private sector in Africa stands as a primary cause of the existence of an unrighteous economy. Many African governments have gotten very large relative to GDP because of a bloated and inefficient bureaucracy. Let's note this. African people cannot compete with the government. If the government is borrowing and spending excessively, and especially when the spending is mostly on non-contributive activities, such as a bloated bureaucracy, the living condition of the people will suffer, along with their ability to be globally competitive. We will see how this is developed in my discussion with Professor Jeff Dumas. I was recently in the United States and had an interview with the world-renowned Professor Lloyd Jeff Dumas, Professor of Political Economy, Economics, and Public Policy at the University of Texas at Dallas, where I did graduate school and completed my PhD in Political Economy. Professor Jeff Dumas was by far my favorite professor. I was privileged to be his teaching assistant. Incidentally, he was the chairman of my dissertation committee. Professor Dumas has published many books and numerous articles in 11 languages. He has discussed his work on TV and radio programs all over the world. He's an authority in economic development, and it was a great opportunity having a discussion with him at his home and on the campus of the very prestigious and beautiful University of Texas at Dallas. Here is a portion of our extensive discussion. Professor Dumas, it's a great pleasure to have you on Magnus Pacul GVA.
It's great to be with you, Magnus.
Thank you very much. It seems like it wasn't too long ago, or maybe it was too long ago, because it was back in the 80s when I was a student in your classes, and you were my professor, and you were just wonderful. And I must say that much of the foundation to what I do today in fighting poverty and underdevelopment really should be credited to you.
Well, I'm very proud of what you've done with what you've learned.
We will try as much as possible to try to relate some of the great concepts that I learned over the years from you and that you continue to churn out. We'll try to connect them to what's happening in Africa and how Africans, can use some of the things that we talk about today to dig themselves out of poverty and deprivation and underdevelopment. So, and one of the things I want to mention also is that there is this new concept that I have been looking at lately that I call the unrighteous economy. And basically what I mean by that is that there is this unrighteous economy that can evolve when there's repression of economic participation. I think that when you have structural setups and institutions that work to repress people in terms of their participation, that you have an outcome that is essentially unjust and unfair, which can lead to low productivity, low output, and then indeed set off a perverse and very vicious circle, that also has many bad things that can come out.
Many people talk about Africa as a resource-rich continent, but it seems to me that the greatest resource Africa has is its people. And people can't do what they're capable of doing unless they're in the right situation, unless there's an economy that gives them the opportunity they need, a political system that allows them the freedom to operate so they can take advantage of their full potential. They can learn what they need to learn and do what they need to do. And I think that's where Africa's future lies, with its people.
Professor Dumas, in Africa, poverty still remains a serious issue. What do you see as being the main reason why Africa still lags the rest of the world, it appears, especially sub-Saharan Africa in the area of poverty reduction?
It's a very complicated question, or at least it's a complicated answer. It's an easy question to ask. But I would say that one of the most important things is there's much too much violence in Africa. There's much too much conflict. There's much too much diversion of resources to economically unproductive activities, particularly in the form of military spending, which is essentially a form of spending that doesn't produce economic well-being, although it may be useful for other reasons, and corruption. I think there is still a mindset in Africa among too many people that to get what you want, what you need, you have to be able to take it from someone else. That's not how economics works. When economics works right, it creates mutual gains. It creates situations where everyone can win. And by your becoming richer, I can become richer as well. So we have to change that mentality as well as to redirect the resources in Africa to more economically productive uses. When you simply increase education without increasing the opportunity to get jobs, to start businesses and so on, you create frustration. A lot of what happened in the Arab Spring in Northern Africa is an example of this, because
Absolutely.
a lot of people were educated,
Yeah.
a lot of young people were educated, they learned to look for a better future, but they had no opportunity. They couldn't find a better future. That's very frustrating. And you don't want to do that. You have to coordinate economic opportunities with education.
Is it possible that one reason why we see the slower pace of development, now there is a fast and brisk pace of economic growth that we're beginning to see in many African countries today across the board. Matter of fact, the average growth rate now is well above 5%, with some very good examples in Ghana, Nigeria, and other places. But it is not translating into the creation of jobs and into fast improvements in the living conditions of the people. So I started to wonder whether there is a preponderance of, or there's a growing amount of this so-called non-contributive activities, relative to what you see in advanced economies. And perhaps is that helping to be a drag on economic growth and development?
I don't think that's just a feature of democracies. I think that bureaucracy and the overgrowth of bureaucracy has been a problem in Africa and in many other parts of the world for a very long time. But I think you can see the interaction between democracy and development with an interesting historical example. Think about South Korea. South Korea was one of the poorest countries on earth in the 1950s. It just emerged from a terrible war in which perhaps 9 million people died on the Korean Peninsula. It was a very poor country. It was a dictatorship for a while. It was a Western-oriented dictatorship, but a dictatorship nevertheless. That helped things get started in a way. Some good decisions were made, some good economic decisions. But it really took off when it became more democratic. When the country became more democratic, more people could participate in the economy, more people could participate in the political process, then South Korea really bloomed. And now it's a country that sells lots of manufactured products all over the world. First-rate, top-quality stuff, not just cheap, at good prices, but very high quality. And that's an interesting historical example. You need to have democracy to allow the economy to flourish, because it allows ordinary people who don't have political standing, who don't belong to the, quotes, right political party, to still engage in business and economic activity and have a chance of succeeding. One of the things that may help with this problem of people becoming impatient is for building a civil society, organizations that ordinary people can join and support, that look out for particular issues, human rights issues, issues of environment, for instance, because that way they're participating in between elections. Elections are not the beginning and end of democracy. In between elections, there have to be ways for people to express their opinions, to apply pressure, to change policies, to encourage certain types of activities on the part of the private sector. And that can be done by participation in civil society. One of the best cures for feeling that you're powerless is to do something. And you can do something if there are organizations of other like-minded people around trying to move in a direction you think works, to support that organization, to be part of what they're doing. Maybe that will help people feel more engaged and be less impatient.
Yeah. So I always try to say that there are two kinds of serious poverty issues. One is the real state of poverty, where somebody's income, let's use income poverty, somebody's income is below some threshold. Then there is this stress, where some people, in my view, have actually died from, because of the weight of wondering how can I take care of this whole group of people, whether they be family or people from a village, that appear to not be assigned to me. So that represses their ability to move forward. Is there an arrangement? Is there anything that can be done to cause people to be less dependent? Is there a way of reducing the dependency burden? Because I think that it impacts in a negative way on the working class. Is there anything that we need to look at here to see how we can reduce that dependency burden and that so-called poverty stress?
I think the key word that you used is investment. You have to generate more economic opportunity and more knowledge of economic opportunity through education, investment in human beings, and through investment in infrastructure and the like. Because without generating more capabilities and more opportunities, you're in a situation where if one person starts to succeed, everybody thinks, well, that's the guy who won the lottery, in effect, so we got to latch on to them. If there were more economic opportunity, broader economic opportunities, they would think perhaps instead, well, he did it, why can't I do it as well? And try to do it on their own. That's a very big difference. So this kind of stress that you're talking about could be reduced. And I also would draw a parallel to this and the so-called resource curse that many nations have. Sure. Nigeria, of course, is very dependent on oil revenues. To use the oil revenues to fund consumption, to keep people paid off, in effect, by funding consumption, is one thing. That leads to no development. That doesn't encourage development. To use it as a source of capital for investment, just as the individual in the village who gets a job, if he can use his capital not only for investment in himself, but possibly for investment in some of the other people, rather than just buying them food or providing them some kind of shelter, giving them the means to do it for themselves. It can be a sort of a smaller scale version of the same thing. You use that source of revenue as a fountain